this particular issue of let's be more collaborative, do they all see that as an issue? Because what's their view of the world on this? Because so many workshops where actually some people are going, well, I don't really think there's a problem. What's the problem?
The question is from Thinking Focus.
Hi, I'm Paul from Thinking Focus.
Hi, I'm Rich from Thinking Focus.
Hi, I'm Rob from Thinking Focus.
And the question is, it's about facilitation. What do I need to consider to plan a workshop from a team or a team workshop? I'm going to do that again.
I would. That was.
Oh, dear.
35 years in radio.
Yeah, I know, I screw up like a pro. And the question is, when facilitating, what do I need to consider to plan a team workshop? So this is part of a short little mini-series we've got on facilitation, because we do lots of facilitation here in Thinking Focus. It's kind of what we do most of the time. And I've got Richard and Rob with me because I think between you guys, you got 40, 50 years worth of experience in facilitating workshops, at least, probably longer.
Something like that. You're trying to build it up even more than it is.
I'm not old enough.
I was going to say, I was just trying to say you're old. That was all I was trying to do.
I'm offended by that.
And what I wanted to do was to tap into all that experience that you have over doing this for such a long time, because you've worked with, teams that are brand new. You've worked with executive teams. You've worked with large groups, with small groups. So I want to tap into some of that facilitation experience and go, so when someone comes to you and you start the process of thinking about, right, I'm putting a new session together, where do you start the planning? What's the starting point?
I think Rob and I would both agree the first thing and most important thing is what is it they're trying to achieve? That's where you're going to start. What is it you're trying to get out of this? Because sometimes people come and they haven't actually done that bit of thinking. They're not sure what the end goal is that they're aiming for.
Yeah, it's really weird, isn't it? They sort of, we want to get the team together. Great, what for? So you do have to get the point of it really quite clear, because unless you can deliver the outcome, you might as well not even put the plan together.
So that's the starting point. So often do you end up sort of having to work with them to go, well, what exactly is it you're expecting to get out of the end of this?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think quite often people have done a little bit of thinking, like Rob says, right, I want to get the team together because I've got something to communicate, maybe that I'd like their input into, for example. So they've thought that, but they haven't sort of then gone, actually, what is it I'm really aiming for at the end of this, day or 4 hours or whatever it might be?
Yeah.
So when you say what they're really aiming for, are you looking for some specific outcome? Are you looking to go, I want some ideas about this, or I want next steps about something? Or is it that specific that you're looking for?
Yeah, I mean, the point of getting that group of people together, that team together, if we call it that, could be just to, almost get a collaborative set of ideas, or, to work on something so that people feel engaged. Or it could be, and everything in between. It could also be that there's something they have to specifically be better at and walk away with at the end of it. And, those two things, just using those two examples, would cause us to think quite differently about what that workshop, the design of that workshop and what goes into it.
So I got to play that out for a second then. And if I imagine I'm the customer and I'm the person coming to you and saying, actually, all I want to do is get the team to work together better. So at the end of this, I want them to be working together. And I guess it's different from size of team. So let's just go, it's a 8 to 10 people. What does that mean in your thinking then, in terms of how you're thinking of structuring that workshop?
Well, without labouring the point, I'd dig a bit deeper into exactly what you mean by I want them to work better. So there'd be a lot more conversation around that. So we get more clarity. But I think one of the things you start then, let's just imagine that we've worked that out. For argument's sake, let's just imagine we've got some clarity on what exactly they want. You then start to say, okay, how many people have we got? So I think you said there's 8 to 10.
Yeah.
So you kind of go, right, how many people have we got? How much time have we got? And who are they? Where are they coming from? Are they all working at the same level in terms of peer group level? Also, something to factor in as well is, are they all from the same division of the company? Are they in different divisions of a company? Who do they report to? What does that mean? And then also, there's probably loads more of these, but another one that comes to mind is their cultural background. Are they all, because we do a lot with teams from all over the world. So, for example, are they all UK based? Or have you got some that are coming from Europe? Or have you got some US in there or further afield? You got that to factor in as well, because that will play a part in your thinking.
Can I dig down into that then and go, so what is it you're sort of trying to get to there? What the differences? So if just take, for example, a couple of those. If this group of people are from different divisions or from different parts of the company, what does that cause you to think? What are you looking for?
Well, their expectations of what's required of them might be different. They might be in this team or this workshop that we're, planning or designing for the client. They might actually be coming into that workshop with a completely different set of experiences or expectations or ways of working, and we're wanting them to collaborate with other people, some of whom they might not know, some of whom they might not necessarily, work with after the workshop, even before the workshop. So there's a bit of juggling to be done in terms of getting the best out of, what's the goal of this? Being more collaborative. You have to factor those things in, so that you're giving the right environment, or creating the right environment, should I say, to enable people to work together effectively.
I think you hit on a basic point there, Rob, which is, do they all know each other?
Yeah.
Because if they don't all know each other, then you've got that to deal with as well. So, if you want people to work together more collaboratively, how well do they know each other? And then, just to echo what Rob said, the other bit for me is this particular issue of let's be more collaborative, for argument's sake. Do they all see that as an issue? Because what's their view of the world on this? Because so many workshops where actually some people are going, well, I don't really think there's a problem. What's the problem? Now, the workshop might be about to help them understand the problem. But so, yeah, I think you've got to consider that just because the person that's contacted you, let's just say they're the manager or leader of a group or a function, sees it as an issue, doesn't mean that everybody else does.
So is that to say then that, actually when you're designing the workshop, you might have to go, actually, the first thing I need to do in this workshop is to almost kind of get agreement that there is an issue to be fixed before we can even talk about fixing it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think one of the things early on that I always say, and Rob and I have done this together many, many times, there's a number of questions people have got in their heads at the beginning of this sort of thing. First question is always, what time does this finish?
Yes.
Right.
Second question is, will I get fed?
Second question is there food?
Yeah.
And then, so these are almost like basic human needs. I need to know this information. And then there's another question, which is, why are we here?
Yeah, what are we doing here?
And that question might have been articulated beforehand through joining instructions, emails, conversations, telephone calls, whatever. But I would always go over it again, because we know that people are busy. They don't always read things effectively. They don't always take it in. So that question is always worth just going over and saying, look, the goal of this time together is to achieve A, B, and C. Where are we all with that? And just have that sort of, it's more often than not, that's a straightforward, easy conversation. Occasionally it's not. So it's really worthwhile just investing a bit of time, Rob, I'd say.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, take an example, and I appreciate this is quite specific, but sometimes we get called in not as a mediator, but as the bridge between maybe two working groups or two functional groups within a company, and they need to be more collaborative. And of course, if you've got 8 people, 10 people in the room, and 5 are from one team, 5 are from the other, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to work out that actually each of those two groups, call them A and B, both think that they're doing really good and that the other one is the one at fault. So, part of that sort of dynamic that we need to, also extend or take into account when we're planning this is, that's likely to happen. That somebody will think, well, we're okay. It's them. They're the ones who are causing the problem.
So you might, to build on that, in an example like that is one of the things you might need to do prior to the workshop is to speak to people who will be at the workshop. So you might actually invest a little bit of time, have a few one-to-ones, just to find stuff out, just ask a few questions, see what people think. So then you're a bit more prepared and armed with the reality of their view of the world.
You have to find a way in your planning of leveling the playing field so that everybody's coming into this with an equal investment into the outcome, but also an equal recognition that there's an improvement to be made and that everybody is up for a bit of improvement. That helps.
And so when you're planning the workshop, are you almost kind of, like I said before, working on the basis that I'm not quite believing that if somebody's told me that everybody's up for this, do you almost go into it not kind of quite believing that and going, I have to test that?
Sure, I do.
Yeah, definitely. And it depends, doesn't it? Because if you know the audience, so quite often we do things with teams that we know really well because we've worked with them for a long time. That doesn't perhaps require the same level of investigation or whatever you called it a minute ago, because you know the people already. But if you're going into it cold and you don't know them, then you've got to invest a little bit of time in that process.
So imagine for a second, I'm maybe a typical listener to our podcast. I'm a manager. I'm in a company. I'm running the workshop. I've been asked to run a day or a big meeting to help solve a problem. I kind of know these people because I work with them already. I'm just a colleague at some level. Where would you start with that? If you were doing it in that situation?
I think it goes back to something that Rich, talked about before. Arguably, you'd spend more time in the planning phase with that individual who is sort of, taking you on or asking you to actually, run the workshop to get clarity from them and to test out a few things about what they think is going to be achieved and what the group, who's the audience, how many people, how much time, all of those questions are absolute gold dust, not only for us to help the planning of it, but them with their thinking. Because I can't count the number of times that you sort of sit in front of somebody who's briefing you into, please do this piece of work for us, and the assumptions that they've made about what's happening in the business and what needs to happen instead is sort of quite amazing, really. And it's not until you start asking questions around clarity and purpose and all the rest of it that they go, oh yeah, well, let me explain this, let me explain that. So all of that, for me, if you've got that conversation with the person who is taking you on, who wants you to run the workshop, it sort of is almost easier, becomes easier afterwards because you've got a full briefing. But then to the question that you asked before, you would spend whatever, the first 15, 20 minutes or so in the workshop with that group of people, just double checking that everybody understands why they're there and what you're going to do.
So I want to draw this right back then and go, so what I'm hearing is the art to planning any kind of event like this is really to get get underneath of what's the point of the event, what's the outcome they want, why this group of people at this time.
Yeah.
And how often when you get commissioned to do that from a manager who's going, right, this is what I want, this is where I'm going, how often do they really actually have a clear view? Or is the skill of you as a facilitator to help them actually work that out first before you even get to plan the workshop?
I would say most of the time they've got a reasonably clear view.
Yeah.
And it's just asking a few extra questions to help them along the way to get even more clarity. But most of the time, people are pretty clear. I think what we find is someone, is asked to do something or has an objective to achieve, and they look at it and think, one of the reasons that we're asked often to do this is because that person is emotionally invested in the issue themselves.
Yeah.
So actually, for them to facilitate it wouldn't be the best idea because they've got feelings one way or another about it. So they need to be in the conversation.
Yeah.
So most of the time, I would say people have got a pretty good idea because they're sort of involved in the situation, but they realise that by having someone external come and ask some questions and bring people together removes a bit of the threat of people thinking, well, what am I meant to say? Because what's this person's agenda, whether they be the leader, manager, whatever. And also means that they can get involved in the conversation. So I'd say most of the time, a pretty good idea. It just needs a little bit of help.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think the thing that I would add to that is that the sort of clarity that they've got is up to and including the workshop itself or the activity they want to be involved in. But sometimes when we're asking questions about, so what is it that you want these guys, whoever's involved in the workshop, to walk away with? What do you want to have? What's the noticeable difference afterwards? That's when there's sort of I think that's where we sort of can sometimes really add value, because they go, oh, yeah, I've been thinking about getting the group of people together into a workshop because I've got a problem to solve. Haven't necessarily thought about, and as a result of that workshop, X, Y, and Z is going to be better, or is going to exist where it doesn't exist at the moment. So I think part of the questioning that we all do, the work that we get involved in, Thinking Focus, is to get our client or the person who commissions us to think one step or two steps further beyond the actual activity itself, to go, okay, and for what purpose? What is it they'll be doing differently and they're not doing it today?
I think that's a really good point. It depends on the purpose of what we're doing, because not all workshops would require follow-up.
Sure.
But quite often a lot of what we do does. So it's like, let's all get together, let's have a conversation about whatever it is. But there's quite often like okay, what are the next steps? How are we going to make this live and breathe? How are we going to keep this going? Type thing, which often means you might want to follow up, whether that be in 3 months, 2 months, a month, whatever it might be. So those questions as well that Rob just alluded to, when you say, right, this sounds great, but what next? How do we make it live and breathe? Mm-hmm. They would then lead you into starting to think post-workshop, because sometimes I think the assumption's made, and we've all been there, haven't we? You've had a great conversation. That's that sorted then. But in reality, if you want change to happen around any issue, you've got to keep revisiting it. You've got to talk about it. You've got to put it front and centre. You've got to remind people. So we would be thinking about that as well. How do you make it live and breathe? What next after this?
Cool. So I think, just to pull that all back together, what I've heard you talk about is kind of 4 things, really, and I just want to summarize those as we finish up this podcast. So the first sort of starting point is really getting a deeper understanding of why you're having this meeting, why you're having this workshop, what is it you're trying to achieve here? And then that sort of point that you raised towards the end there is not just why we're having the workshop, but what you want to happen after the workshop. What the follow-up's going to be.
Yeah.
Then you talked a lot about actually why this group of people, how many of them are, where they've come from, what's their dynamic. And that was the third area I think you covered. But then the fourth one, which you just covered briefly, but I thought was really interesting, is actually something we might not have to do very much because we're third party to most of the workshops we run. But if you're running one in-house for your organization, what's your relationship to this?
Yeah.
Because if you have too strong an emotional connection, you might not be the best person to facilitate that event, because you're going to get too sucked into the conversation and not able to therefore manage the session.
No, don't agree. I don't know what you were listening to, Paul. That was nothing like what we said. No, I think that pretty much captures where we're coming from.
Next time on The Question Is.
If you're talking about a certain subject where you're hoping for vulnerability, you might use phrases like, look, we've all been here. We've all done this. We've all felt this. Who hasn't felt like this? Because we know this is really human. We're all normal. We do think this way. So by saying and using phrases like that often can help people just to settle a little bit and realise they haven't got to be superhuman.
To find out how Thinking Focus can unlock the potential within your organisation, go to www.thinkingfocus.com, where you'll discover more about the work we do, helping our clients increase productivity and enable change.